Hello and welcome once again to the Aligned Living podcast. My name is Aisha DeLune, and I'm going to start by telling you that your life force energy is precious. Now, I know that you know this, but I want to put it into a context. Your life force energy that animates that amazing body that you are living in, we use it for our immunity, we use it for the health and vitality of our bodies, we use it to focus our attention, and we're using it for all of our actions. And we can deplete it. And I talked about this quite a lot in the third episode of this season called Your Inner Landscape, Happiness, Resources, and Your Buffer. But in this episode, I want to talk about it because your energy is precious and because it can be depleted. I want to invite you to make really conscious choices about what you work on. In our last episode, we talked about, hard work. And in this one, I want to talk about choosing what you work on. Because there are some things in life that will not shift to fit your yearnings, regardless of how much hard work you put in. It doesn't matter how much you water a plastic plant, it's not going to grow for you. And it won't matter how much you want it or how much hard work you put in. You could try for years. And if you're someone who blames yourself when things don't work, you could spend all of those years blaming yourself for it not transforming, for it not growing fruit, for it not growing and becoming what you hope for. Now imagine in this analogy that the plastic plant had their own patterns and they could speak. And that plant could then also blame you that it hasn't changed. And this is why personal alignment is so important. And when change includes other people, it's so important to establish the ability to be able to reflect on ourselves and on others. So we've got measurable ways of seeing the effort we're putting in, the effort other people are putting in, not to turn you into a blamer of other people, but just so that we can take off the rose-colored glasses and see what's in front of us. Now, it can be very challenging to identify these plastic plant situations, especially if self-blame is a go-to, or just want it enough, or dig deep, or push through, or I know my own hope and my own faith in the potential of things has also caused me to spend a lot of time watering plastic plants. And it can also be really heartbreaking when you do kind of finally have that realization, whatever I do in this situation, it's not going to actually change into what I hoped for. They're hard. They're really hard, those situations. And it's one of the many times we're investing in support, and especially support that doesn't profit from one of your options. So unbiased support can save you a lot of pain and time and energy and money. And I know I've been that support for many, many people for a really long time. And I see the power of it. In this episode, we're going to look at the reasons why most people stay, on track, continuing to invest their energy into something incongruent. And I'm doing this to support you to recognize your power in these situations because they can be so painful and because it's really difficult to see them clearly when we're in them. And you'll know this if you've ever known someone in an incongruent relationship. They can be very hard to watch when you care about a person in it. You've probably been able to see their misalignment and then heard them reframe it, justify it, pour more energy into the hope that it'll change. And usually it's only after that relationship has managed to shift dramatically, if something massive happens, an awakening happens, behavior changes, things like that, because things can change, but normally there needs to be an external stimulus for that. It's usually only after the relationship has shifted dramatically or ended that the person that was in it can look back and actually see how compromised they were. So it's kind of like the relationship version of can't see the forest for the trees. And this is true for incongruent relationships, toxic work environments, all sorts of different things. So this episode is about supporting you to see what you're in and empower you as much as I can in this format. So there's 3 main reasons that people stay committed to an incongruent situation, and I'm going to just talk about those 3. The first is loss aversion. Now, loss aversion is very well documented. It's a human tendency to feel the cost of losing something or focus on that cost more strongly than we feel or focus on the benefit of gaining something else, even if they're kind of equal size and importance. In everyday life, this means that our nervous systems often treat potential loss as really high importance, kind of beep, 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 really important data. Now, this makes total sense. In childhood, human beings have an incredibly long dependence in terms of our development cycle. So in childhood, literally our survival and safety is dependent on belonging. Because if there's not caregivers around you motivated to feed you and, keep you safe, we would die. So it makes sense. And an incredible human being called Gabor Mate has done some great work on this. His work on this was linked to how addictions operate and are created. I'm oversimplifying, but his work helped me to really get language for seeing, in childhood growing up, we have 2 really important, equally important needs. And one is authenticity, which is linked to kind of intuition, that survival instinct. If you watch an animal documentary and you can see a prey animal just happily eating grass, and then all their ability to read the situation, their instinct, their intuition kind of lifts the head and goes, something's changed. So that's that connection with our own gut knowing, our own intuition is an amazing survival strategy, and it's kind of built into our innate wisdom. There's that need, but there's also the need for belonging, because belonging means safety and those caregivers, staying motivated to care for us. So in childhood, if authenticity comes up against belonging will always win because connection gets prioritized. And this is how from childhood onwards, even if we had really wonderful parents, I know for me, I was so sensitive to approval and disapproval. It kind of only took a look for me to get in line and follow whatever was needed. I certainly didn't need a raised voice or anything like that. And if I got one, it was really crushing. So in childhood, if that authenticity, listening to our own feelings and behaving and choosing in alignment with them comes up against belonging wins. So this is how loss aversion, it's kind of developed early on. So when we perceive or we're focused on loss or maybe lost in a particular choice, our nervous systems can respond like there is a danger. And even if that loss isn't something physical like losing a house, but it's something like I might lose approval, or I might lose certainty, or I might lose this identity, like let's say for people with a job role, like I'm a coach, and if I wasn't doing this work, well, that identity might go away. People can have an identity around kind of their usual actions. The loss can be around losing a familiar role. So the body can respond to this as if something really essential is at stake. So this is one of the really important life situations where knowing that your feelings are sacred feedback becomes a doorway into real, aligned, like cellular, soul deep, sustainable change. So I want you to know that when a choice brings up fear or dread or tightness or grief or the kind of this urgency to back away from the choice, it doesn't automatically mean don't do it. I know those sensations feel like incongruent signals, but it can actually just mean that something in your system, your mental patterns, your nervous system, your body's experience perceives a loss, or it's focused only on the loss. And this actually just needs to be recognized, understood, correctly interpreted, and worked through. When we're focused on a potential loss, it can also bring up tenderness. And with that tenderness, it can bring a lot of reframing. So it's like, oh, it's not that bad. Nothing's perfect. I'll just be grateful for what I have. It's not always like this. And let me be very, very clear that reframing is an incredibly useful skill, and it's often part of my coaching, but not before we've addressed the foundations and all that's happening underneath the surface, because otherwise it's just painting over cracks and not actually dealing with the fact that the building is unsustainable. The second kind of main thing that I see going on with people staying committed to incongruent paths is what I'm going to call as the heading lost time and not wanting to be wrong. They are really linked. Sometimes we have spent a lot of time, money, energy, and effort on this part of our lives that's no longer aligned, or perhaps never was. Maybe we chose it from an earlier phase of ourselves that maybe had less self-esteem or less ability to consider our own needs as well as everyone else's needs. Lots of different reasons. Or when we really wanted approval. Now, I've seen this play out in, marriages, careers, businesses, financial decisions. Sometimes we've put so much time in that we feel like all of that time will be a waste if we change our mind. And depending on the situation, obviously I'm up here talking broadly, but let's use a relationship example. Let's imagine you've poured 7 years into a relationship based on the hope that it could be different. And I've heard so many people say, well, I don't want to leave because then they'll go and have a relationship with someone else and they'll benefit from all the hard work that I've put in. And often that is not the case. It's a fear. It's actually part of loss aversion. But that's not really what's going to happen, because if they'd made the changes, if they'd benefited from the work, you wouldn't now be breaking up. So what I would say in that particular situation, and I'm in this situation with a client right now actually, is looking at owning her development over those, well, it wasn't 7 years, but that was the example I was coming up with. So over her years in that relationship, and she gets to walk away with all those skills. So she's learned how to feel her congruence and incongruence. She's learned how to put her feelings into words honestly, but without attack, ways of, communicating, because she used to kind of do that. Oh, it's fine. Nothing's wrong. And then a month later go this with their partner. So she's learned not to do that. She's learned how to recognize misalignment, put it into words, ask for what she needs in terms of, skill sets tangibly. So she gets to leave this relationship, and yes, all those years of effort, with all those skills. So she hasn't lost any time. It didn't go the way that she so hoped it would, but she gets to leave with all those skills. So it's not a loss of time. And sometimes people, this can be true in relationships, especially where we've chosen a relationship and maybe the people around us didn't agree, and we put our stake in the sand. I've had this with a client too, where she married someone that her family disapproved of. And so when she was like many years in, questioning that choice, she had this whole thing around, I don't want to be wrong. I don't want it to be that they were right and I was wrong. So we needed to kind of work our way through that as well. So just because we've put a long time into something doesn't mean it's going to eventually work out, just like that plastic plant. And whenever we are in any kind of polarized right, wrong, good, bad, all of that is I call it the egoic structure. All of that is the thought patterns of the past, and it can be worked through. It can be worked through with someone like me, and we can help you to see your own alignment and come out of this frame of, I don't want to be wrong, or what it would mean if it was wrong. Because through the lens of learning, like the example I gave you, because she learned a great deal, like none of that is wrong. The third thing that I see at play most often, there's other reasons why people stay on track with incongruent things, but these are the top three that I see all the time, I would say every week in my work. The third one is looking at the short-term pain rather than the longer-term alignment. So sometimes the short-term pain is actually just having the bravery to even ask, do I still want this? Or do I believe this can truly change? Is this still right for me? I've had a lot of clients resist asking those kinds of questions because they're so afraid of what the answer might be. My experience is the sooner you ask those questions, the sooner we can actually work through the foundational patterning, and that's actually how we create longer term alignment. And often what they're afraid of losing, they don't even lose. It just dramatically improves because they're working with the situation in a new way. And I'll give you an example of that a bit later on. Sometimes the short-term pain is, I don't want to be seen as the bad person, or I don't want to let anyone down. So let me give you a job analogy. So maybe let's imagine you're in a job, and I've seen this with like family businesses or people who've worked in businesses for a really long time, and they feel like if they left because it's not aligned anymore, or they want to do something else, that they would be the bad person. It would mean that they didn't, respect all that they'd received from the company, or they'd be letting people down. And in this situation with clients, I would be getting them to obviously feel their own alignment and feel into the potential long-term gains of their own alignment. And then we would have a look at their values and how they want to be and interact with the workplace. So have a conversation with the workplace that is grounded, open, honest, depending on the depth of the relationship, professional, but also leave that workplace in a way that's values aligned. So it might be about giving them enough notice that they can find the right person. It might be helping them find their replacement. It might be staying to train the next person, whatever it is that's aligned, so that you can leave feeling like you've respected the relationship, but also respected yourself. And the long-term alignment. So one of the things that I say all the time, which is quite difficult for people to believe sometimes, many clients have not believed me when I've said it, but what I say is, when you honor you, which basically means when you are living in your own alignment, everyone around you benefits in the long term. And this can be difficult to understand if you're in situations where basically everyone benefits from your lack of ability to hold a boundary. And when you start putting boundaries in place, everyone gets very cranky and, oh, you've changed and all that sort of stuff. But long term, everyone benefits. So in this job situation, when this person who isn't aligned in the job anymore leaves, they create the space for someone who is a complete cellular, consensual, congruent mind, body, heart, and soul, all saying yes for the job. So that when they're in it sort of out of obligation. They're taking up the space where someone could be that was actually a yes, I can't wait to go to work. This is my dream job. So the short-term pain we feel can also be grief. So even when we're following our alignment, we can still grieve the loss of something. And the grief doesn't mean that the loss isn't the right choice. So if you go to a funeral and perhaps the person who passed away was a very problematic human being that caused a lot of pain in the lives around them, there will still be people there grieving. Grief doesn't mean that the loss isn't the right choice if this is a choosing situation. Obviously, we don't choose when people die, but it's just this is the short-term pain. But the longer-term alignment is this kind of space that opens up for everyone. And I just want to finish this little bit by saying, like, if you were able to choose and have someone in your life, and it might be a friend, a partner, someone who works for you, but they're only there in your life to avoid feeling guilty for leaving, or they're only there out of obligation, or they're only there because they don't think you could cope without them, would you prefer that, or would you prefer someone in your life consciously choosing you in this congruent, lit up yes kind of a way about the role they play in your world? Like, all of us would prefer the latter. And this is where long-term alignment works for everyone, because if we're in something that's out of alignment, we're taking up space for someone else who could potentially be a yes. Now, obviously, I'm doing big, broad spectrum, and this is where there's no substitute for one-on-one integration of these kinds of concepts, because I can make it real for what's happening for you. But these are the things that I wanted to share. We can stay on track and committed and working hard to incongruent situations like the plastic plant that will never change no matter how much love, time, money, effort we pour in. And the three main reasons are loss aversion. We don't want to lose time and we don't want to be wrong. Or we're focused on the short-term pain rather than the longer-term alignment. Now, I want to wrap up this episode and I'm going to give you an example. And this is a client I worked with some years ago who came to me because she wanted help to kind of make the best, I'm using air quotes with my fingers, make the best of a relationship that she felt stuck in. So this was a second marriage for her, and she was trying to make it kind of palatable because she felt stuck. So and obviously, if you've listened to me before this episode, I'm completely unwilling to do that kind of work. I'm going to kind of go into the foundations. I want to hear about, why do you feel stuck? How real is that? Let's look at let's look at the foundations. Let's look at the holistic ecology of this situation. So to cut a long story short, and what ended up being like 12 months of working together, when my client met her kind of now husband, she'd been single for a really long time. So she was a very colourful dresser, very creative being, and there was this beautiful chemistry and connection. But as their lives entwined, there were certain decisions. So she made a decision, collectively they made a decision where she sold her house and moved into his house. And one of the things that we needed to work on underneath the foundations was how much anger and resentment she had towards herself for making that choice. She was so angry with the previous version of her because now property prices had risen so much. Even though that she was so unhappy, she felt stuck. She felt like she couldn't leave because she couldn't buy her own property again, and she didn't she didn't want to be having a loan at the age and stage of life that she was at. So she was very angry with herself. And the other thing was, because of their dynamics, so she was very sensitive, very empathic, and she hadn't developed the communication skills for having conversations when her and her husband didn't agree. So when she, let's say, wanted to paint the walls of the lounge room so that the whole house wasn't, off-white, because she was colourful and she wanted, different colour curtains, and she wanted to bring some of her own essence into their shared space, he would only have to, a little bit like I was saying when I was a child, he'd only have to look at her disapprovingly or go, oh, no, that doesn't make sense, or, oh, it doesn't make sense for us to spend money on that, for her to just back away and shut down. And same with, going on holidays, going on, what they spent their time and money on. She was very sensitive to his approval or disapproval, or his anger or his disappointment. And that just made her, by the time I met her, she was felt like she'd lost herself. She just kind of choice by choice by choice, prioritizing his comfort over her own. She just didn't really recognize herself and was trying to make the most of it because she felt stuck, like she had no options. So one of the things that we did was, have a look at all of these things that I've spoken about. So she, first of all, had this loss aversion. If she leaves this relationship, well, she's losing being a homeowner. She's losing her financial security, not because he supported her financially, but just because she didn't have the money to have her own home anymore. There was also a loss aversion around kind of identity, because it was her second marriage, and this links a bit to not wanting to be wrong, but she just didn't want to be that person that had two marriages that didn't work. And that's a whole other conversation, because I think relationships where we learn and grow, I think they are working amazingly well, regardless of if they end. But that's the topic of another episode. So there was loss aversion going on. There was, not wanting to be wrong. There was the time that she'd put in. She was feeling older now, and she'd kind of had this idea that there would never be another relationship if she left this one. And there wasn't really the short-term pain, longer-term alignment, because she, in her mind, had absolutely no choice. So one of the things, we worked on lots of different things. We worked on her, the honouring of her own feelings. We looked at lots of things. But one of the things that I got her to do was actually to look at how much money she had from selling her property, look at her, superannuation, look at her various, financial resources. Now, I'm not a financial planner. I'm not a finance professional, but I wanted her to add all of that up. And I got her to go to realestate.com and put in that amount of money. She wanted to live close to her grandchildren, so with a drivable distance from her grandchildren, put that amount of money in and see what you could buy for that amount. She'd never done it because her misinterpretation was that she could never do it. Like there would be nothing available at that price, so she hadn't even looked. Turns out when she looked, there were places. Yes, they weren't as wonderful as what she sold earlier, but she also wasn't raising children anymore, and she didn't need, more than 3 bedrooms and all those sorts of things. So she actually found property that she could buy without going into debt with the amount of money she had. And this transformed our work, because now she felt, rather than she was in this kind of survival, desperate, place inside of her mind, thinking that staying with this man equaled survival. And I likened it to, it's like she spent this last while until she chose to come and work with me. It's like you're hanging onto a cliff going, I need this cliff to survive. And you've looked down and you've seen the ground is only 2 inches away. So she's now standing on the ground. She doesn't need the cliff, hanging onto the cliff to survive. She landed inside the knowing of that she could make different choices. And then she was open. She was open to the deep work that took the longer amount of time in our sessions, where she learned the communication skills to stay present in a conversation about the patterns in their relationship. So she spoke to him about, hey, I know you're unaware of this, but here's what I've been doing. I've come into this relationship, and if you're like a little bit cranky, I shut down. If you seem disappointed, I shut down. If you're a no, I shut down. So I've kind of stopped sharing myself with you. And so she started sharing herself again. She started asking for what she needed. And if his first response wasn't, oh, yes, she stayed in the conversation. Because she knew she had options, she stayed in the conversation. And they had very different conversations. They had more of a partnership, more of a doubles tennis team instead of he's the only player and she's on the, on the sidelines. And their relationship absolutely transformed. Because it turns out the woman he was in love with when they met and chose to get married was the woman with the colourful house and the messy craft room with projects that never got finished, and she still bought new material, and that liked to travel and that liked to go out and listen to live music. And he hadn't been living with that woman for a long time either. He just didn't notice because he was in his own, well, he knew that things weren't fabulous, but he had no idea what was going on inside of her. So as she shared more and spoke about the patterns and shifted their patterns, like, not only did they stay together, but they stayed together and had a great deal of fun. Things dramatically improved. But when she was stuck in loss aversion, when she was stuck in don't want to be wrong, she wasn't having those kinds of conversations. She didn't have the nervous system safety to have them. So sometimes, and to be honest with you, in my work, most of the time, well over half the time, most of the time that people are staying in incongruent things, they have this fear of losing the thing if they actually address it. Most of the time, they stay in the thing. But because they show up aligned, because they learn with me how to have very different conversations, the situation they're in just dramatically improves, whether it's a workplace, whether it's a marriage, whether it's a sibling relationship, whatever it is, dramatically improves when we enter it from a place of alignment. And when you honor you, body, mind, heart, and soul all saying yes, everybody benefits in the long term. So I hope that is useful and helpful for you. If you have questions or you want to see how this would land in your own life, then please book a discovery call with me and we can talk it through. And other than that, and even if you do book a discovery call, please keep listening because I've got a lot of experience to share and I'm loving recording this podcast every week. Thank you for listening.